But the headline is How Goldman Sachs Secretly Bet on the U.S. Housing Crash. And to go over that is the author, the investigative reporter, award-winning investigative reporter, Greg Gordon. And he's written for some of the biggest newspapers in the country, and right now is writing for McClatchy News Service and newspapers. And he's broken a lot of just huge international investigative stories. And maybe later we can talk about a few of those. But to talk about Goldman Sachs secretly bet on U.S. housing crash is Greg Gordon. Greg, thanks for coming on with us.
My great pleasure.
We're about to go to break, but just in a nutshell, this is one of the most in-depth, detailed investigative reports I've seen on the banking industry and Goldman Sachs. This is just an amazing job.
Thank you so much.
In a nutshell, what did you discover?
Well, we wanted to find out how Goldman Sachs got out when nobody else did. And so the first story of the series is really about how Goldman was selling off. At some stage, it became a sell-off. We don't know exactly what that date is, but in 2006 and 2007, Goldman sold $39 billion of bonds, essentially bonds backed by risky mortgages registered in the United States. These securities, many of them have gone south. And then, in addition, Goldman was peddling more exotic securities, many of which were tied, again, to risky mortgages in the United States offshore. And at the same time, Goldman was betting in these dark markets through devices that are known as credit default swaps, but they're basically insurance-like bets. You're buying a little insurance policy on some specific thing, and they were betting that the housing market would go south and that these bonds would all lose value.
So they start quietly dumping on the market AAA-rated paper that was tied to derivatives or exotic instruments, as they're called, and at the same time betting against it after they dumped it. Man, that is amazing.
Well, I want to be clear. They were making bets on similar, but not exactly the same security, but on similar issues. So in other words, they were betting that the housing market's going to go bad, and if the housing market goes bad, all these mortgages are going to go south, or many of the mortgages, because people were going to find themselves underwater in their houses. We know people across the country have homes that are worth less than their mortgages.
Sure. That's been well documented. We're going to break, come back in a long segment, get more into this incredible article, and he's saying it's the first in a series. Can't wait to read more. Stay with us.
Do you understand how dark it is? How far down the line we are? How late it is?
He's written multiple parts in a detailed series, the first of which we've been covering off and on for the last week and a half, How Goldman Secretly Bet on the U.S. Housing Crash. Let me just read you a couple lines from Greg Gordon's syndicated article. It says, to piece together Goldman's role in subprime meltdown, McClatchy reviewed hundreds of documents, SEC filings, copies of secret investment circulars, lawsuits, and interviewed numerous people familiar with the firm's activities. And then they go through in this article, piece by piece, Mr. Gordon did, exactly how this was done. And so just stating in layman terms, what do we know Goldman Sachs did? They are the only big group to get out of this. You talk about how this was used against their competition, like Bear Stearns and others. All these other groups went belly up, but Goldman Sachs came out smelling like a rose, record profits, record bonuses. At the same time, we see an overrepresentation of Goldman Sachs alumni in regulatory and government positions, and I want to get into that with you as well. But I know as a journalist, you just want to stay to the facts, but I also want to talk about these documents that you got a hold of. But, I mean, let's go through exactly what's happening here and where this is going.
And let me say that it's not an accident that so many Goldman executives go on to senior jobs in the government, because Goldman for decades has encouraged its members, once they have attained their wealth to go and spend some time doing some public service, go and work for the government. So, you know, it sounds noble, but the problem is that when the guys get into the government, they end up being Treasury Secretary or head of the Commodities Futures Trading Commission, which can regulate some of these derivatives, as you call them, that are traded outside the normal markets. You create appearances at the minimum that are very awkward and in some cases disturbing. Now here you had Hank Paulson serving as a Treasury Secretary at the end of the Bush administration last fall in September when everything blew up, and it seemed as if every key decision that was made, maybe it's just a coincidence, but it seemed as if every key decision where Goldman Sachs was a stakeholder, the decision benefited Goldman Sachs. They took over Bear Stearns when Bear Stearns collapsed, and Goldman had contracts with Bear. We don't talk about this in the series, but it's true. And Goldman was able to settle out when J.P. Morgan took over Bear Stearns, and that was a deal arranged by Paulson, and then Lehman Brothers, which was a big Goldman rival, was allowed to go under. And that is going to be a decision that will be debated for a very long time. But Lehman's collapse caused a lot of disturbance in the markets, and there's been a running debate about whether Lehman should have been rescued with the rest of them. Lehman had really bet heavily in subprime and lost heavily, and then the decision was made to bail out AIG, the American International Group, and Goldman had placed $20 billion of these insurance-like bets with AIG, the American International Group, the American International Group. And so Goldman got paid off out of this money, this rescue money from the government. Goldman was paid $12.9 billion, and over $8 billion of that related to its secret bets, hedging its subprime and other related risky mortgage-backed securities. And it's also noteworthy that when this $12.9 billion was paid off, it was 100 cents on the dollar. So it was decided that even the officials at AIG wanted to offer considerably less money to the various counterparties on all these bets it was holding. And by the way, AIG made a dreadful mistake because AIG did not reinsure all these bets. It just assumed that the housing market was going to go up forever. And when it turned south, all of a sudden, instead of just getting these nice premiums from Goldman and I presume Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers every year, paying maybe $100 million a year in premium so that they could have this insurance. All of a sudden, AIG had to reimburse them all and pay off maybe $50-60 billion, and it didn't have the money, and that's when everything melted down. Well, so Goldman Sachs really always benefited from the decisions that were made by the government officials, including its alumni.
Greg Gordon's our guest. He's an investigative journalist with McClatchy Washington Bureau, and there's several parts in the series. One is how Goldman secretly bet on the U.S. housing crash. Another, Goldman takes on new role, taking away people's homes. Another one, mystery, why did Goldman stop scrutinizing loans it bought? Now, let me just be clear on this, reading over these pieces. You have Goldman Sachs, 2006, 2007, everything's supposedly wonderful, the housing market's going to keep going up forever. Anyone who says that's not the case is a conspiracy theorist. We must give everyone a loan, even if they don't even have a job or lie on their application. It's the American way. Meanwhile, they're putting out promotions saying housing's great, these instruments we're selling are wonderful, while betting against similar instruments. Did the Goldman Sachs massive shorting, did that contribute to the overall bubble beginning to burst? Because because that gets into a whole nother area. Not only, are they telling people these derivatives are great while they're separately betting against them secretly, but did their shorting contribute to the bubble beginning to deflate?
Well, a couple of things, Alex. One, there were derivatives. They were sold generally offshore, but the stuff they were selling here, and even to foreign customers, but they were registering and selling them here, were bonds. They were good old high yield bonds, rated AAA, but yet Goldman was hedging them. Secretly hedging them. And the second thing is, I just wanted to mention, when you talked about Goldman promoting the fact that the housing market was doing so well, I've seen reports that Goldman's chief economist was warning that a bubble was approaching.